Hello students, so in this video we're going to be talking a bit about adjustments versus adjustment layers, and I'm going to be walking you through your assignment for chapter 7. Alright, so adjustments versus adjustment layers. They look very similar. Now adjustments are going to be under your image menu, and you go down to adjustments, and then there's all kinds of different things that you can do. We're going to be doing a couple of these today. We'll get more into depth with these later on in the semester. And we have adjustment layers. So you can get to adjustment layers by clicking on this little icon down here, or there's also an adjustment layer panel. And there's a lot of the exact same options as this, but there is a huge difference. The big difference is that if you do an adjustment from this menu, it will be applied directly to a layer, and that's it. You do it to the layer and it happens. But if you do an adjustment layer instead, you can actually go back and change it later. So that is why I pretty much always recommend doing an adjustment layer, because this has to do with what we call destructive and non-destructive workflows. So when you apply something directly to your layer, you can undo it like, once, or if you go on your history panel, if it's the last 30 things you did. But once you pass those 30 actions, or you close Photoshop and then open it again, and those actions are gone, you cannot undo whatever you did in this adjustment area up here. And that's what we call a destructive workflow. Destructive because you can't go back and change it. So if you do something and then you're like, later on you open it the next day and you're like, what was I thinking? That was way too much of an adjustment. I took let's say the saturation way too high. You can't go back and actually change it without kind of starting over. So that's a huge pain, right? You don't want to do that. If you do feel like you have to do it for whatever reason, now sometimes when our files get super big, it might feel like this is a necessary thing, or if it's a very quick change, it might feel like it's necessary. But so if you do decide to do this, I would at least make sure you make a copy of the layer first by either doing Command J, or you can click on a layer and drag it to the new layer icon, and note that this icon has changed. It's a little plus sign now. But at least make a copy of that layer so that you still have the original layer without those changes underneath. Just turn off that one, the original layer for now, and you can go back to it. And so because that's a destructive workflow, using adjustment layers is a non-destructive workflow, because you can go back and change it again. Just like when we were playing with, I think it was the gradient in the last few chapters, where you can click on this little gradient icon and open it up again and change it. That's exactly the same thing. You can go. It is a non-destructive workflow. So I always recommend going that way instead. Okay, the other nice thing about adjustment layers is you can apply a layer mask. So if part of the adjustment you actually don't want on your image, you can go in with that layer mask, bring up your brush tool, use the brush over with black, and it will cover, it'll mask away that area, and you don't have to worry about deleting anything. It's just masking it away. And using masks is another example of using a non-destructive workflow. Okay, I know it's a little confusing, but you'll get used to it as you play along, as with most things in Photoshop. It takes some time and some practice. So today's assignment is going to be chapter 7. So go ahead and click on each one of these files to start downloading them. Once you have downloaded, once you have them downloaded, you can go ahead and open them all in Photoshop. So how I'm going to do that today is I'm going to, they're here saved in my chapter 7 folder, and I have them all here. I can select the first one, and then holding down Shift, I can select the last one, and it'll select everything in between. And I can go ahead and either drag and drop. I can right click and go to Open with Photoshop, or you could have also gone to the open button in Photoshop. All right, let's let these open real quick. And let me open up our book. Okay, chapter 7, how to adjust your image. And just as a reminder, make sure as you're working through this that you are pausing the video to read each of these pages. They all do have some really great information in there. So the first thing we're going to do is adjust your image using levels. And FYI, if you've noticed, I actually changed this file for the first two. That other waterfalls file just wasn't quite working out very well to show you what was going on. But this one will do just fine. All right, so we're going to start off by doing a destructive adjustment. It's telling you go under the image menu, under adjustments, and choose levels. So let's go ahead and do that. We have image, adjustments, levels. And now the big thing with this is that once we apply it to our image here, it is there. You can undo it once. You know, if it's in your history panel, you can switch, go backwards until you get to that point, but it's not going to be its own layer. It is applying it directly to this layer. All right, so this is really similar to what we did with setting our black and white points and playing with that black and white points in Camera Raw. This is just a whole nother way to do it, and as you're going to see, he's going to mention that this is kind of the old school way to do it. This is true, but it's always good to know multiple ways to do things in Photoshop, just in case. All right, so let's try this out. It says if you hold down Option and click on the white slider, you can actually move this, and as areas turn white, those are going to be areas that are completely white. So as soon as it hits like right where it's hitting that white spot kind of in the middle of the sky and starts turning completely white, I'm going to let go. And so that's kind of making sure that the brightest parts of our image are the truest white. Now let's do this for the blacks, and it's going to be the same thing. It's going to mean that we're going to tell Photoshop that we want the darkest part of our image to be the darkest black. So I'm going to hold down Option, click on this, and pull it forward until some areas turn completely black. Okay, there's some in the trees. I'm just going to inch right back a little bit and then let go. All right, so now you can see that we have changed this and added, it's called expanding our tonal range, basically. You can also take this middle arrow or triangle and make your image brighter or darker overall. And that's also just basically telling Photoshop that all of these numbers in here, that you want to change them so that they're either brighter or darker. I'm going to go ahead and reset that. You can see there's numbers in here. I'm just going to put in 1, and that resets it right to the middle. Okay, and we're going to hit OK. Now you can see that there's no extra layer. If I open my history panel, it does tell me I've done the levels adjustment. All right, so that's the first step. Let's move on. Okay, next we're going to use curves to add contrast. And we're doing it the same way, the destructive way. Let me click here in Photoshop. I'm going to come up to Image, Adjustments, and go to Curves. All right. Now, curves is very similar to levels. In fact, all of this down here is pretty much kind of doing the same thing with black points and white points. So we're really not going to have to make too much change there, but we are going to add some contrast. And maybe this makes a little bit more sense to some people's brains on the whole input and output. This is saying that if, the numbers of this image saying that these are the blackest areas are right here, but the output is going to be different. You can raise this point and lower this point. And if you guys have noticed, I've switched to this larger arrow, which kind of, I'm still trying to get used to. But you can see that number changing. If the input is 0, but the output is 35, so if 0 is the darkest tone, we're telling it that instead of having the darkest 0 tone be 0, the darkest tone, we're telling it to be a 34, which is a grayer tone, not as dark. Okay, but We're really going to use this instead to do a little bit of contrast. There are some presets up here, and you can increase contrast, and this is going to give us the classic S curve, if anyone's ever heard of that. That is this S line here that takes our darker areas and makes them darker, and our lighter areas and makes them lighter, and that is the basics of contrast. I'm going to go ahead and reset this to the default real quick. You can also click on this line and add your own points wherever you want to change it up. And you can see it's moving the entire line. So if I want to take my brights up there, but I want my darkers to be dark again, I can click down here and then pull this down, and I've added some contrast to there. For both the levels and curves, we also have channels. RGB stands for red, green, blue. So you can actually go in here and change the brightness and darkness levels for each of these different color channels. So I can come in here and make the lighter areas redder, or I can take away some red, and that's the opposite of red is green. So we can make them greener or redder. You can also do this with all the other ones. So I go to blue, I can make areas bluer. The opposite of blue is yellow or yellower. All kinds of funky things you can do with this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and reset this one more time. Go to default. I am going to go ahead and just go to medium contrast for now. That'll work. And hit OK. So we did these two things, and we could have done the exact same thing as an adjustment layer. So we could either come over here to the adjustment layers panel, and when you go over each icon, it tells you what it is. This is brightness, contrast. Here's levels. So if I click on here, notice we get the exact same looking box as we did earlier, but we have it on a whole new layer now. So that is my preferred way. The book does, we are supposed to teach you that there is this other way of doing it. But just so you know, in my opinion, this is by far the best way to do it. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to go ahead, while I have this layer selected, see it's lighter gray, I'm going to hit delete to get rid of it. Okay. If you want to play with this a little bit, feel free to do so. There's the curves adjustment layer where you can change things up and such. Do all the same things that we just did. Playing with the channels. And actually we're going to use this to correct old photos next week. So there are some really cool things you can use this for. Alright. But you're not required to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. I'm going to open up my history panel and make sure that you can see it. And now I'm going to go ahead and take my screenshot to turn this in for the assignment. Let's move on to the next one. 3 through 5. Color, cast, and tint. Color, cast, add tint, and reduce color. Alright, so color casts are when you have too much of a specific color in here. Now, in my opinion, I really love purple and magenta, so this looks really great. But for this assignment, we're going to go ahead and take some of this out. Alright, and we're actually going to do it by using the curves dialog box. So let's go ahead and come in here. It's telling you to do image, adjustments, curves. And we're going to actually use the eyedropper. So here are the eyedroppers. This is to click areas in your image to tell where to set the black point, the medium point, and the white point. Okay, so we want to go ahead and do the middle one. Click on that. And we're supposed to click somewhere that's like a medium gray. This is a little rough because this is, a nighttime shot, but let's try clicking there. And there you go. That's way more of probably what the natural color looked like. It had a purple cast to it. We've taken the purple cast away by telling it that, hey, this building here is supposed to be in middle gray. You can see that it's changed the RGB channels. The green has been taken lighter, the red a little darker, the blue a little darker, and so it's added and taken away different colors to get to this middle area. Now, this is very similar, pretty much the same things we were doing in Camera Raw with the white balance eyedropper tool. Now, the hard thing is when you have a photo that you're working on that doesn't have something that's gray, like let's say all of these buildings were different colors instead, we didn't have any gray areas, and it gets a little bit harder to use these eyedropper tools. But if you do have gray, light gray, dark gray in there, it can be really helpful. That's taking care of the color cast. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. There's my curves. All right, let's move on. Okay, so what if we wanted to do the opposite? We wanted to add a tint. We can actually, now we're actually going to go into the adding adjustment layers. So we need to go and create a new adjustment layer. So here's the adjustment layer icon right down here at the bottom of the layers panel, and it's telling us to use color lookup. Alright, so now we have this panel that pops up. Click and hold on the 3D LUT file pop-up menu and you'll find a list of color tints and color grading looks you can apply by choosing one from this menu. Alright, so there's all kinds of different looks that you can apply. So feel free to play with it, whichever one you want. Soft warming look. And you can see because we added it as an adjustment layer from down here, it has its own layer now. So if I decided I wanted to block some of this, let's see, what should I block off on here? I can paint over an area. So let's bring up our brush tool real quick. I'm going to hit B to bring it up. And I have my black here, painting with black. And if you're not seeing the circle around it, it's because your brush is probably really big. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make my brush smaller by either coming right up here to the options bar. Now this is only going to be here when you have the brush tool selected. Remember, everything up here changes with the tool that you are using. So I can come up here and change the size here. I can also use the bracket tools to make it larger and smaller. Alright, so let's say I didn't want this color on the water here. Oh, let's see, it's a little bit too, I want to have a softer brush as well. Let's go softer. Okay, and I could say I don't want that color happening right here. And now you can see with my mask that that area has been masked out. And another tip I'm going to give you is if you want to see where your mask is on here, if you hit the backslash button, it'll actually come up with that same masking feature that we played with before. Now, also know that when you do this, the white and blacks flip. So you got to flip back, and then you can come in here and see where you missed and fill in these areas here. And then if I hit the backslash button one more time, the mask goes away, looking good. And so you can see now that this color grading or tint is only affecting that upper area instead. All right, let's move on. Oh, wait, before I move on, we're also going to talk about solid color adjustment layers, which I think I talked with you a little bit already on one of the previous chapters. But if we come out here, this is another way to do like your own tint as well. You can come here to solid color, and it adds an adjustment layer for you. And, oops, did I hit the wrong one? Let's see. Solid color. All right. And let's say I wanted to add, I don't know, let's go with like a dark blue. I'm going to come up here, maybe this really nice dark crisp blue. A little bit right up here. I'm going to hit OK. And now you can play with the different blending modes. And this is actually going to work really well if you come down to color. And now we have this overall blue tint. And if it's a bit much, you want to bring some of those colors back, you can just bring the opacity, or basically that means how see-through this layer is. You can start bringing that down. And so it'll be just like a light blue tint, or you can make it darker blue tint. either way. And again, let's say we did this and this has its own layer mask. So I can come over here with my brush tool. I'm using these keys, my bracket keys, to make my brush smaller. And I can go over certain areas and say I don't want this area to have that blue on it. Or maybe, let me hit undo, Command Z. Let's say I don't want the water again to have it. I can brush over this area. And I'm going to give you another quick secret, Command Z to undo. Let's say I wanted to do the exact same thing, have the exact same layer mask as this. If I hold down the Alt Option key and then click here and drag it up, you see that little double arrow, it's copying it. Replace layer mask, yes. Bam, I have just replaced and given this the exact same layer mask. So that can definitely come in handy later on, especially next week. We'll talk a bit about more of that later. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off for now. Let's move on to the next page. Okay, so what if you have too much of a particular color? All right, let's bring up our HSL panel, Hue, Saturation, Luminance, if you remember. So if I come over here, here's my hue saturation. When I mouse over this icon, click on here, and we can do a couple things here. There are presets, so you can, let's see, I think this one's one I actually might have made. You can add all kinds of different, play with the different presets here. You can add your own. There's custom, so you would make what you want to do and then hit custom and create your own preset. You can also pick the color that you want to do. So let's say I do the yellows, and I can change the hue of the yellows, like with that HSL panel that we played with before. Now this one has quite a bit more control, because if you remember, like for the yellows, if I would have picked that for camera raw, it basically gave me like more, going from like a greenish yellow to like an orangish yellow. This you can change it to any color you want. Let's see, let's make it something weird. Green. You can highly saturate it or desaturate it, take out all the color. You can make it lighter or darker. So you have quite a bit of control in here. I'm going to go ahead and reset this to the default real quick. And the book, it's telling you about this handy little hand tool. So I can come over here and once I've clicked on that, click on the area of the image that of the color you want to reduce, then drag to the left. So let's say I want to do yellows again. I can click there, drag to the left, and it's dragging down the saturation. Drag to the right, it brings it back up. So if you're not sure exactly, like, maybe it looks like a mixture of colors or something, you can instead do that. You click here and say, okay, I want to go more saturated, less saturated. Play with that all you want. Pretty fun things to do with that. All right. So, even though this page was reducing the color, I actually took the color up a bit. And again, with these adjustment layers, the great thing about them is if you mess up, you can double click on the icon and it'll bring you back exactly where you're at. And you can play around with those different areas again. Let's see, what did I do? The purples, magentas, something like that. And there's a lot more options in here. We're just sticking with the basics today. Photoshop is a super intense tool. You can do so many different things. I don't want to overwhelm you guys. All right, looks good. Let's go ahead and do a screenshot. And that one is ready to turn in. Oh, my bad. I forgot to open my history panel. Screenshot. Now it's ready to turn in. Let's go to the next one. Okay. So if we want to match the color of one photo to another photo, open the image that has the overall color tone that you like. So we're actually going to use this image before, and I'm going to turn off these other layers for a moment. And make sure the photo that has the color you want to change is the active image window. So let's go back to this one. So when we want to change, then go to the image menu under adjustments and choose match color. Image menu, adjustments, and match color. So now we're going to go to this source and we're going to pick the image that we want it to match from. So that's going to be the 3 to 5. And it's giving us a preview already of what's going to happen. Pretty cool. Alright, and so now you can hit OK. So if you're doing like a project where the photos need to look more similar to each other with the tones, you can use this to match the color. I've seen people do this really well with like fall photos. Like you take a photo of a forest, but it's the middle of the summer, but you want it to have a fall look. And so you bring in a photo that has a fall look and match the color to that, and it adds in those nice fall colors. Alright, next, this is something we've already done. How do I use Camera Raw on an image that's already open in Photoshop? You guys know how to do this. We just come over here, go up to Filter, and come down to Camera Raw Filter, and always make sure you go to this one. See right here it says last filter. I haven't used a filter since I opened Photoshop today, so there's nothing there. If I had used Camera Raw as my last filter, that would be there. Don't want to click on that. That's just going to apply the exact same settings. Instead, we're coming here, Camera Raw Filter ... And it's opening this up here. I can go ahead and change it up how I want. Make whatever changes you like. Hit OK. And the Camera Raw filter has been done. Okay, so I have my history panel open. I've got my layers panel open. Done the work. Let's go ahead and do a screenshot and move on. All right, let's go to this next one. We have Photoshop auto fix my photo. So if you want to try this now, I personally like fixing it on my own. I like to have control, but there is this option you can do. So if you go to image and then you come down here to auto tone, it will automatically auto tone for you. This one it did a pretty good job on. And of course, if you don't like it, you can undo by hitting Command Z or stepping back in the layers panel. We'll just go ahead and leave that for now. And of course, it also talks about the Camera Raw filter. Woohoo! Okay, let's see, next page. All right, and this is talking about exactly what I've been telling you this whole time. Doing adjustments that are undoable forever, which is going to be doing adjustments from up here, image, adjustments, and making adjustments here. Oops, image, adjustments, making adjustments. Or you can come over here. Now, there are a couple of adjustments that are not over here, and that would be the few times to come here, but we'll get into that later in the semester. For now, let's play with, I'm going to go ahead and open up my curves. Let's just play with adding something. Oh, let's see, they're talking about levels. Levels, curves, either one is fine with me. And I'm going to make this a little bit brighter. I want my snow to be a bit brighter here. I'm going to make my darks a little darker to add that contrast. That S curve, you can see it has an S-ish shape over here. All right, not too shabby. You can also do all kinds of stuff. Like here we have color balance. So if it was a little too yellow or blue or green or magenta-y, we can do that. And we're actually going to do another one in just a moment. Convert to black and white. So if I come up here to my adjustment layers, here is the black and white. I can click here and it's created its own layer here for that adjustment. And what's really cool about this is I can come in and change the look depending on the colors that are in the photo. So if I wanted to give that darker background, darker sky look, I could do that. Now, if there are colors that aren't really in the photo, the slider's not going to do much. So there's not really magentas in here, so that's not going to do much. If you remember, most of this photo is black, white, and blues, so that cyan and blues are really going to be the only sliders that do anything for this photo. but it's a really cool way to make things pop out, especially like for flowers. Red and greens, actually, when you try to turn something black and white, they come out as pretty much the same tone. So you can take a, like, let's say a picture of a rose and turn it to black and white, and then take that red up and down depending on your taste, and those greens up and down to differentiate the flower from the leaves. So this is a really cool tool to be able to take advantage of your black and white instead of doing like those one-click filters. All right, so I'm done with this. Whoops, let me make sure I open up my layers, my history panel. My layers panel's open. Command Shift 3, take my screenshot, and that's it for this chapter. So we're going to have a little bit of a longer lecture coming up, and that's part of the reason this is a short chapter, but I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to play around with all of these different adjustment layers on your own images as well.